Hey, I'm CARBO brother. I'm Chris Nelson, president of CARBO. Really excited to introduce a new trigger spring kit for the newer Winchester Model 70s. So if you've got a Winchester Model 70 that was manufactured after 2008 till now, this kit will work for it. So you have a newer one. This is for the newer Winchester Model 70. So really excited about this. Initially, we kind of stayed away from it. We've got one for the older version. We stayed away from it because this trigger is supposedly adjustable. It wasn't until you guys kept requesting a kit for it that we decided, all right, let's just get one of these new ones and see what's going on here. You know, and we've done that from time to time. We pick up a gun and then it's like, oh man, trigger's actually really light, like under 2 pounds or something crazy, and we wouldn't even bother with it. But this one here shocked us because the owner's manual says 3.5 pounds from the factory. It says you can go as low as 3 by taking out that screw, the adjustment screw in here. So we do a little experimenting in this video. We show you what taking out that adjustment screw will actually do in comparison to the factory setup with the factory springs. So it gives you a good idea of how much adjustment do you really have on the new Model 70. But I'm really excited to tell you 50% trigger pull reduction with this spring kit. So really sweet trigger pull reduction. In this video we went from 5.5 down to 2 3/4. So really fantastic and impressive reduction. Love it. Can't wait to show you. Let's get on our tabletop and get into it. Parts needed for this build: Winchester Model 70 trigger spring kit by MCARBO. This is the after 2008 model. So this is a post-production date of 2008. So any Winchester Model 70 produced after 2008, this is the kit you want. So you got a newer one, this is the kit you want right here. It comes with a lighter Sear spring and a lighter Sear actuator spring, give you a nice, smooth, even trigger pull reduction. Tools needed for this build: bench block, 1/16 inch punch, 3/32 inch punch, 1/8 inch punch, hammer, little micro tip flathead screwdriver, a 5/32 inch Allen key. You don't necessarily need a T-handle like I got here. A 1/16 inch Allen key, blue 242 removable Loctite, synthetic grease with PTFE, and as always guys, make sure we're an iPro. Let's go ahead and take this opportunity together, check our firearms, make sure they're clear, check the chamber, check the magazine down here, check the bolt face. This firearm's clear. All right, so here's a couple pages from the new owner's manual for the 2008 and newer version of the Model 70. It's got the MOA style trigger in there. You'll notice that when you're reading the manual, it's page 22, it'll tell you that the trigger pull is preset at approximately 3.5 pounds from the factory, but it can be adjusted from 3 to 5. And then over here, it'll show you how you can make the adjustment. So you can see, so towards the top of the firearm, you got the over travel adjustment screw there. And then above it, you got your trigger pull weight adjustment screw. So we're gonna do a little testing here. All right, we're gonna go ahead and determine how much adjustment can we really get. So this will be interesting to see. You know, they've got a disclaimer here that says trigger pull weight screw will fall out when the trigger has been adjusted to its minimum pull weight of 3 pounds. So also implying that it could be used without that screw in there. We'll also look to see how much thread engagement actually does something inside the housing here. And we'll tear it all apart, analyze it. It'll be a good little thorough review. Looking forward to this. All right, let's go ahead and see what kind of factory trigger pull we're starting with. We're gonna do a 5 pull average. 5 pounds, 6.9 ounces. And I hit enter, and you see how it logs it down there, and it says pull number 1. So it's computing it the whole time. It'll show your average down here. So we're gonna start doing that going forward. You know, I got everybody this Wheeler gauge here at the shop, really like them. You know, a lot of these features are just simple and easy to use. I just find it a lot more accurate than any of the other ones out there. 5 pounds, 8.9 ounces. 4 pounds, 14.2 ounces. So if there's any human variation in there, it should average it out. I think going forward, giving everybody an average, it'll help too, because you know, some guys will be like, I didn't get the exact trigger pull the dude in the video got, and you can see right here how every trigger pull is slightly different. All right, so that's our 5 pull average. So you see 5 pulls down there with the in, and then there's the average. So it's 5 pounds, 4.7 ounces. So it's much higher than what the owner's manual states. You know, says it starts at 3.5. So we're also gonna get in here and kind of do a little experimenting to see how much adjustment there really is. But that gives us our starting point right there. So we'll play with a couple things in there and we'll check it again. You'll see here in a sec. All right, so we'll get started with a quick little disassembly. So go ahead and pull up on your bolt, pull it back, hit the bolt stop right here. All right, that'll release the bolt. Now when you put it back in, you gotta make sure you get this extractor right here lined up with the lugs on the bolt. So you can see these 2 lugs right here. We gotta get the extractor lined up to reinstall it. Pretty simple and straightforward. Set the bolt aside. Now we're gonna go ahead and turn it upright. We wanna remove these 2 takedown screws right here that hold the trigger guard and the floor plate assembly in place. All right, so just need your 5/32 inch Allen key or T-handle. Gonna remove the front and rear. The front is gonna be shorter than the rear. All right, so there's the front takedown screw. There's the rear takedown screw right there. so much longer. Little side-by-side comparison, so front, short one, back, long one. All right, set those aside. Now we'll just pull up on this trigger guard floor plate assembly here. Simple and easy. The whole thing comes out just like that. We can set it aside. Now the box magazine, all right, you just pull up on it, it comes right out. There it is. So when we go to put it back in, this takes a little second to kind of get it in there just perfect and lined up so that we can get the trigger guard back in place. We'll cover that again in a minute. One thing I noticed about this disassembly, reassembly, this can be a little particular, but it's easy. We'll get it worked out. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and remove the stock. We're gonna separate it from the receiver and barrel. A bunch of different ways you could do it. You can start up here and just start prying, or you could just push wherever you can get a good little bit of real estate. You can push in there and try to separate it, but I just find it's easy just to kind of pull like this on the front. And then it all comes apart real simple and easy. All right, you'll notice there's your barrel lug there, right, on the receiver. All right, that's where it goes, right in there. So it beds right in there, real nice, tight and snug, holds it good in place. Something to pay attention to when we go to put it back together, and we're gonna do a little testing here in a second. All right, so you can see your trigger mechanism here, and up here are the adjustment screws. So I promised you we'd do a little testing to figure out how much adjustment can we really get with the factory springs in here. All right, so this one, it's already been more or less played with, adjusted. We had to remove this wax or epoxy. I mean, this stuff, you gotta chisel it off. It'll take a good 10 minutes to kind of chisel that stuff off. Have you a good pick handy to definitely clean out everything on the threads, and even on the inside there where the Allen key goes in, it's all covered just like this over travel adjustment still is. All right, so this one right now, we're set at 2 threads, roughly 2 threads showing. So one here and then a little bit back here. So we're gonna see how much of an impact that has once we get it all disassembled. But first, let's do a quick little test. Let's remove it all the way, just to see what that minimum trigger pull adjustment is from the factory with those factory springs. So we'll just take our little 1/16 inch Allen key, drop it right in, and loosen this baby right out. And it definitely takes a minute. It's a long set screw. You wouldn't even need to really remove it completely to get that maximum trigger pull weight adjustment. There's how long that set screw is right there. So pretty decent length, doesn't affect that spring. That spring will stay captured in there. All right, so we'll go ahead and throw the stock on real quick, get a little trigger pull reading and see what it did. We started right out about 5.5 pounds initially. So I'm putting it all back together real quick. Throw the bolt in there. All right, let's see what we got for an adjusted trigger pull. 5 pounds, 4.7 ounces. So not much. I got to kind of hold it together here, and I'm just pressing it down together on the table. Everything's essentially the same. I mean, technically, you wouldn't even really need to put the stock back on, but I want to try to replicate what we did initially as best we can. 5 pounds, 3.4 ounces. I already know the answer because I already tested this, and I discovered that it doesn't do hardly anything, and I will recommend you don't even bother removing it. And you'll see once we get it apart, 5 pounds, 5.6 ounces. So you can see I'm stacking them all up, 4 pulls, that's the average right now. 5 pounds, 3.6 ounces. All right, so your average, 5 pull average right there, you can see the 5. And 5 pulls, it's 5 pounds, 4.4 ounces. I think it's a marketing thing. It kind of really irritated me when I saw that because I was expecting a 3 pound. And I was kind of confused because we put this off for so long doing a kit for this new one because we got one for the old model. But the new one, I was like, well, it's got an adjustable trigger, 3 pounds from the factory, and there's no sense us even doing it. It wasn't until you guys kept requesting, like, hey, you got one for a newer model? It's like, no, man, that thing should be light. So we just picked one up finally, and I was blown away. I can't believe that. So no wonder it says adjustable from 3 to 5, but mostly 5 pounds all the time, regardless of what you do. And you'll see, it'll make a lot of sense once we get into it. So let me just quickly catch up to where you guys are if you got it all broken down. I know we just kind of paused there to do some testing. I just thought that was important, at least to have something for you guys to reference and do your own testing. Let me know what you discover with that. Go ahead and measure it factory, get a good average, use a gauge. A lot of guys might complain about not getting the same trigger pull reduction as me on the video or whatever, and they may be just using like a gallon bucket, a 5-gallon bucket. They're weighing out the water and they got a string tied to the trigger. And that's not really as precise as a measurement device like this, so it's not really a good comparison. So I think it's important too, and all firearms have different trigger pull weights, so I'm eager to hear what you guys are getting, just kind of build a baseline, get some good data, we can share that. All right, cool, I'm gonna catch up to you All right, so now we're going to focus all our attention on removing the trigger mechanism here. All right, you got your bolt stop up here. You're going to have to remove that as well. So you can see this bolt stop's held in by a pin here. All right, and it's good to try to memorize a lot of the orientation, especially the springs. All right, and then there's a forward pin up here. So these two pins hold in this trigger mechanism. All right, so that's one thing we got to identify. And then the other thing is there's two pins here that hold some things in place on the inside there. And these pins are exactly the same, they're universal. You can see how they basically marred the ends of each side just to keep it from slipping out. You know, I've removed this one quite a bit and no issues so far. The reason they do that, it leaves a burr there and it just prevents it from walking out. So the burr is still there. So you'll still be able to push these pins back through, it'll stay in place, no problem. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna leave that trigger pull adjustment screw out. All right, we'll put it in at the end just so you can see how little it actually does. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and set up on the bench block. I'm gonna rotate it over, and one thing I'm gonna point out before we rip this apart, at least it'll be a good reference. So this is your bolt stop right here, and you can see how that spring is set up in there. So you got that little end with the little hook. This side of the spring has got a short leg with a pretty big hook on it. And then this side up here, long leg with a little bend on it. So that's the orientation right there. So it'll be spring, and then the bolt stop, and then the pin, and it's on the large head size of that pin on the left-hand side of the firearm. Same with the bolt stop on the left-hand side. And you can see there's a cutout for it. There's nothing over here. So really can't mess that one up. I love that kind of stuff. All right, so we'll set it up. I'm gonna tap out this pin right here. Should be able to just push it right out. Got my 3/32 inch punch and give her a little tap. And you can see right there how it pops out. Here's the pin right here. So I'm going to remove the pin, and I always like to set things in piles, so make yourself a little pile. This is going to be your bolt stop pile. Or if you got some little cups or something, or those little metal tray holders, hopefully you have a few of them, because I'll just put this little assembly together in a pile right there. Now, take out this pin up front here. So just kind of position it so we're not putting any undue stress on anything. 3/32 inch punch, tap it right out. Always good to check your progress. All right, looking good. Almost there. There we go. So you can see this little roll pin that goes up front. So roll pin's going to take a little extra work in comparison to that smooth pin we just removed. So roll pin up front. Set that aside. And now your trigger assembly comes out just like that. All right, nothing else here on the actual receiver itself. So we're good. We can set that aside with the barrel. Don't need to mess with that any longer. Now we can get right into the trigger mechanism. So we can go over a couple things in closer detail now. So you can see your trigger, obviously, trigger return spring here. This is important because this is a weird one. You can kind of screw it up and put it in a few different ways. And once we get the trigger out, you'll notice there's a little cutout section. You can see it like up here. Here's the cutout right there, and it's on the right side. See how this is flat and smooth here? And you can see how you got this flat and then it banks in. That's the cutout for this trigger return spring. So the trigger return spring will rest on the right-hand side of the trigger like that, and you can see how this loop basically comes around and just kind of sticks out and hooks on that assembly, you know, the assembly housing. And then there's a little leg, barely see it, but a little leg that goes behind the trigger there. So I hope that's helpful. You know, anything that you can do to memorize these sort of things or even a reference later. All right, we're leaving that out because we're going to go ahead and look at it at the end to see what it does. Now what we want to do is get our Sear out. So our Sear is right here, and you can see how that functions. So inside is your Sear actuator. So your Sear actuator is held by this pin right here. And this is a Sear actuator spring right here. We're replacing that. And then we're gonna be pulling out the trigger as well. So this is your trigger hinge pin as well. So you got, you know, two pins here, Sear actuator pin, trigger hinge pin, and then we've got the Sear bushing here, which holds the Sear in place. So we're gonna push that out first, and then we're gonna remove the trigger, and then the Sear actuator, and then it's all out, it's done. It's that easy. Removing this bushing here, the Sear bushing, just a matter of taking your punch and just pushing it out. You don't even need to hammer it, and you'll feel it. All right, and once it's out, there's your Sear. It's basically captured by your punch right now. Pretty simple and straightforward. There's no way for us to mess this up. You know, you just line up the holes. So that's easy. I like that. So I'm putting them together though. I got my little Sear bushing and Sear together. I'm gonna set that different side of the table. Factory Sear spring right here. I'm just gonna pull it out, set it with the other one. I'm gonna lay all this out and go over it again here in a second. All right, so you can see inside a little bit better now. So you got your Sear actuator right here, and you got your Sear actuator spring right there, which lines up with that trigger adjustment screw. So we got to tap out these 2 pins and we're pretty much done. So we'll tap them out. We're gonna start with the trigger down here. Do that one first. You can use your little 1/16 inch punch. Tap it right out. I'm gonna slowly pull this out so you can get a good idea how that spring sits in there. Just like that. And you can see how it hooks on the back of the trigger. So we're gonna replicate that, and I'm even gonna lay my trigger down in this orientation with the spring sitting there. I always love those little memory cues when I'm putting it back together. So now you can really get a good view of how everything's held together. All right, you see that Sear actuator just wants to kind of flop around now, nothing holding it in tension, nothing holding it in place. So we'll tap that out next. I'm gonna go ahead and just leave that pin that was with the trigger. I'm just gonna leave it with the trigger. You know, try to keep them together if you can, but if you get them mixed up, it'll work just fine. They're identical. All right, another pin. And now we got the Sear actuator in there. Just give it a little tap and let it fall out. And it sits in there like this. So you can see the orientation of how this Sear actuator sits. And another easy way to remember it is this little tit right here that's on this flat face. That's supposed to locate inside the Sear actuator spring. So if you forget everything in terms of the orientation, like where's the barrel, I don't even know. Because when it's in pieces like this, it's hard to remember. That's it. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. We'll set the Sear actuator down, and now we can go ahead and remove that factory spring, and then we can drop in the new springs. So really straightforward, you know, disassembly. All right, there's the factory spring right there. We'll set them in a little pile. I'm gonna lay it all out, and we'll review it again here in a second. I'm gonna go ahead though, while we're at it, before we do that little parts review, let's just throw that screw in there, that trigger adjustment screw, and see how much it actually does. All right, I'm gonna turn the lights up a little bit. We're maxed out on light now, but you can really see what we're working with down there. This is where the adjustment would happen when that screw goes all the way through. All right, so I'm just simulating with the punch. So, you know, if you tighten it up way too tight, it wouldn't even function. So the concept is that from the factory, it's, you know, set supposedly at 3 pounds, and that you can adjust it lower by removing this, which didn't seem to work, at least in this case. So you can see how very little adjustment there actually is in there. All right, so we'll throw that set screw in. We'll go ahead and get it started. Really, the whole point of this is to figure out, well, how many threads showing is the maximum or the lightest I can go, you know, without it having any effect. I'm looking down in there and I'm hoping you can see it. So there's the set screw down there, and then there's a little flat, you know, a pocket just above that hole. So you can see that the set screw is not even really hitting that flat yet. You can barely see it, but there's a little bit of a cavity, a little recess still. All right, that spring is gonna sit just larger than that hole. It's like a square box in there. So we can keep going. We can keep tightening it up. That is pretty much flush right there. So that set screw is pretty much flush with that little square opening where the spring's gonna sit. And look at where we're at. We're at about 1.5 threads showing. So if you're at 1.5 threads or greater, it does absolutely nothing. It's just absurd. It's kind of insulting. So now let's go ahead and do something to our trigger that actually will make a difference. If you want to put a little Loctite on there, we can, just so it doesn't fall out, but you saw, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to put any Loctite on it. I don't think it really needs it. I am going to back it out just a hair. All right, so you can see that's 2 full threads. It's a little recessed. You know, flush was at about 1.5 threads showing, so we went ahead and just took it a little bit further out just to make sure it's not doing anything. So if you tighten it up flush, you know, that would make the trigger pull a little heavier. But if you're anything above 1.5 threads exposed out here, you're just fine. Put a little thread locker on there. If you don't ever plan on messing with it ever again, that's it, man. So we can go ahead and proceed. Let's do the install, let's lay it out and go through listing off all the parts. All right, so here's all the parts that we just removed from the trigger mechanism. So you got from left to right here, so you've got your Sear bushing, you've got your Sear, you got your Sear spring, all right, and you got your actual trigger housing right here. You got your trigger return spring, and this is the orientation. Remember how I was talking about it? That trigger return spring sits on the right-hand side of the trigger in this orientation, where that little leg is on the back and that big hook is towards the front there. It wraps around the housing. And then there's the pin that was with the trigger, but they're universal, so no need to worry about it. There's 2 of them. So here's the other one over here. These 2 are universal. This is your Sear actuator here. All right, your Sear actuator pin, and this is a Sear actuator spring. So we're replacing 2 springs, the Sear actuator spring and then the Sear spring up here. So we'll go ahead and grab our M CARBO kit and do that now. All right, so here's our M CARBO spring kit, all right, for the 2008 and newer model for the Model 70. All right, we'll open this baby up. Our new little hanger tag's got a target in there, so if you need something to zero with or just shoot at. Please do that before you throw it away. All right, here's your spring. So we got our lighter Sear spring and our lighter Sear actuator spring. Let's go ahead and compare these to the stock spring. I'm gonna use this bag to throw the factory springs in because it is handy. You never know, you might wanna have those springs if you send it back for any kind of repair or whatever, it doesn't matter. You know, this isn't gonna affect your warranty, they're not even gonna really know, but they may replace springs, part of their troubleshooting. So I got factory springs here, I got the MCARBO springs here. All right, let's do a quick little comparison. Sear actuator spring. All right, so factory spring over here, MCARBO spring over here. Oh, nice and light. Oh yeah, so you can see a major difference there. That factory one's barely moving there on the right. That MCARBO spring is getting some good flex to it. All right, so put this factory one in the bag over there. All right, let's set our MCARBO spring, the Sear actuator spring, down next to the Sear actuator. We got our MCARBO spring here on the left, the Sear spring. Ooh, look at that. And then we got the factory one here on the right. So factory, MCARBO. All right, let's see how they compare. Not even close. So it's good. So we'll put the factory one down, go ahead and install our lighter springs. Sear spring down with the Sear, and let's put this baby back together. All right, so we're gonna start by grabbing the housing and putting our Sear actuator spring in first. Here's a little trick for you. Take some of that grease, all right, and put it on one end of the spring. Get a good little mount there, because this is gunsmith glue right here. You wanna make things stick in the right hole there. This is how you do it. Got the spring coated in grease, and I got my little 1/16 inch punch. I'm gonna use this to kind of feed it down in there. So remember that pocket we were kind of talking about with the adjustment screw? It's right under that little nub. See that nub on the top? There's a pocket right down there. So take your micro tip and you're pushing that spring right off of that punch, and you want to get it to locate right in that pocket as you pull that punch out. And that's the nice thing about the grease, you know, it's gonna stick rather than without it, it's just gonna fall right out. So we got that Sear actuator spring in place. Now we'll grab that Sear actuator. You're gonna stick that Sear actuator in like this, that little tab facing towards the spring. I can see the spring. Stick the Sear actuator in, and then line it up with the hole. Rotate it, try to get it to capture. Use your little 1/16 inch punch just to kind of thread it through. It'll hold it in place. You can check everything up here. So I can see that spring is captured on that little tab on the Sear actuator, but there's no real tension holding it in place, so we got to get that trigger in there first before we'll get any tension on it. Now I'm going to grab that little pin that was in the Sear actuator, and I'm just going to slowly back out that little punch. And something else I do with the bench block, you know, I already kind of jammed it into this medium hole here. This punch fits in perfect, like an extra set of hands. So I kind of push it right in there. You know, if you got a brand new one, just kind of hit it with the hammer and it'll more or less mold to that little hole there. Super handy, especially if you got these punches. That extra set of hands helpful because I can just lay it right there, just like that. I can take my free hands now, got two of them, and I can go ahead and grab that pin. I'm gonna put a little grease on it because it's helpful. You know, I mean, it's gonna help slide it in. These holes are deformed right here on the housing, you know, just to keep the pins locked in. And it definitely does a good job. You can barely get them back in, you know, so the grease helps. I'm just gonna kind of push it by hand a little bit, and then we're gonna give it a couple taps. Still got my punch in there, so it's mostly keeping everything in alignment and together. And I'm just gonna kind of tap it a little bit against the punch initially, and now I can kind of pull it out. Almost just tap it by hand here. Now I'm going to check and see how we're doing, if I got any alignment left or not, and I definitely don't. The other useful way to go about this too is just push down on the table. At least you got it started, and now you can just push on the table and you're most of the way there, and you can kind of eyeball it, that alignment. Now we can confidently just give it a good little tap and we know we'll be in there. And I got a little plastic tip on this hammer, it's helpful. You can use your punch otherwise, you know, or you can just take your little 1/8 inch punch and just kind of give it a couple taps. Make sure it's good and flush. All right, there we go, good and flush, both sides. We got our Sear actuator in there. We got that Sear actuator spring in there. Good, everything's still in place, all right? So this is the front right here, you know, where those adjustment screws are, that's the front of your trigger housing. So that's the direction our trigger is gonna be facing, just like that. So we're putting the trigger in next. Just make sure you got your trigger return spring just like this, so you can see the orientation in regards to the trigger. So you got those two legs, they're on, you know, top of that circular loop there on that coil. Two legs run on top. In this orientation, that little leg behind it, the big loop there sticking out on the right side of the trigger where that cutout is. Perfectly smooth over here. All right, so now we'll just hold it together. We're gonna slide it right into the trigger housing. Just get it right up in there like that. And now, make sure you keep that spring on there. It's gonna wanna do its own thing, trust me. You basically just need to make sure you get that coil tucked in there. and then the rest of it's going to cooperate. Got the holes lined up. Grab our pin and do the same thing. Use our little extra set of hands here. Might as well take a little break there. Now put a little grease on this pin, and we're going to drop that pin right in. So I'm pulling up on the housing and get my pin started by hand. At least that grease is kind of keeping it straight. Give it a few taps, kind of get it in there, at least into the housing. All right, so it's starting to come together. Now I'm going to turn it around. I'm just going to press it on the table since I can look right through that hole and keep an eye on the alignment. So pressing it down, lining it up. That one's a little stiff there. So make sure your alignment's good. Give it a couple taps, you'll kind of feel it. Check it. There you go. Drops right in. So we're almost there. You know, as long as you're diligent, you're checking as you go, making sure you're not just, you know, pounding that pin into the side of something. All this stuff kind of fits nice and free and easy, except for, you know, the way these edges are deformed. It definitely does hold this pin in there, both of them. All right, so this is the way we're looking right now. So you can see that trigger return spring here on the right-hand side, sticking out like that. I know it looks weird, but that's how it's supposed to be. So we got our trigger in there, we got our Sear actuator in there with the Sear actuator spring. Now we're on a downhill slope, man. We're just gonna take our Sear spring, the lighter one in the kit, drop that spring right in. Now we'll take our Sear, we're gonna drop it right in. We really don't have to do anything with this Sear other than just get that bushing in that hole. You don't have to try to get it to locate up here or anything like that. This one takes a little bit of, you know, you're holding a few things at once. Push down the table, that's what I always recommend. One less thing you have to try to do. So line it up, get it started on the back, push right down on the table. As you're looking down in that hole, you're compressing against that Sear spring. And it goes right in like that. And then it holds everything together in place. Trigger assembly is back together, that easy. You can just check, see if it moves up and down, but there's really no way to screw it up. You know, you can't pull the trigger and really do much other than just see that Sear actuator moving in there, and then the Sear will just move up and down on its own. So as long as you got all that, you're good. You know, and got your trigger adjustment screw in there. You know, we're sitting at that 2 threads showing, which is perfect. You don't need to go out anymore. If you want to remove it, you can. You know, it's not going to hurt it. That spring will stay captured, but I'd say go ahead and leave it in there. All right, so we're done. So now we can go ahead and put the rifle back together and see what kind of trigger pull reading we get. All right, so we're going to go ahead and put the bolt stop back in. So here's the bolt stop hinge pin, bolt stop spring. We've got a roll pin up here and our trigger mechanism here. So what we'll do is drop our trigger mechanism in first, and we're going to get that tab on the Sear to locate in that big hole right there. So just drop it right in, and then naturally it's not going to want to really line up those holes for you. So you need to line up this hole and this hole with the holes there on the receiver. So if we just push down and pull the trigger simultaneously, it's going to line up perfect. And then you got to hold it in place. To make life a little bit easier, get it set up on our bench block here. We're going to get a roll pin started by hand. Just try to get it started in there. I just got it placed in there. I'm going to give it a little tap just to get it started in that outer hole on the receiver here. And now I'm going to pull on the trigger and push the whole trigger mechanism in. And I can check my alignment by making sure this hole is clear. So if I got that hole lined up good, then I know my other hole is going to be lined up. And make it a little bit easier, take your little 1/8 inch punch and just drop it right in. So find that alignment, drop in that 1/8 inch punch, and there's your good little fixture right there to make sure you got a good alignment here on that roll pin. So now we'll tap that roll pin right in. All right, most of the way there. I'm gonna go ahead and knead this 1/8 inch punch now, and I'm gonna finish the job. All right, make sure it's at least centered on both sides. It's not gonna be flush 100%, so I went a little bit too far over here. I'm just gonna even it out. Naturally, you'd think it'd be flush, but there's a little excess on both sides, so that's good. Now what we gotta do, same concept, we gotta pull that trigger again to get it to fully seat. And now we're putting the bolt stop in. So we're gonna put the bolt stop spring in first. It's gonna go in just like this. So you got that little hook back there on the back side of the trigger mechanism. And then you got this little leg right here, the long leg with the short bend. It's pointing right in towards that hole there. You see that? So that's what's gonna give it tension on that bolt stop. Now we're gonna drop our bolt stop in over it. So you can see this orientation, how this lever is kind of sticking out. That's the way we want it. We want to get that lever right in the hole, and then we're going to line up that spring, just kind of what we talked about. This is somewhat of a simultaneous process here. And they'll basically just fall right in place, just like that. So you got the hook back here behind the trigger mechanism, long leg, short little bend right there, resting right underneath that bolt stop, giving it tension. Now we just got to line up those holes and get that pin right through. All right, now just take your little 1/16 inch punch and just run it through the backside there. Kind of keep your finger on that spring, because if you hit it with that punch, it's going to spring right off. And now we're going to line up all the holes. It's another little easy way to make sure you got everything lined up as you're trying to press that pin through. You know, springs and holes don't really like to line up. All right, so now we got our 1/16 inch punch in there. You know, this is kind of like a little step up process. So take your 3/32 inch punch, and now we're gonna go ahead and push out that 1/16 inch punch, just because you're trying to line up these 3 holes right now. And you got, you know, a coil there in the center, spring coil. Springs never really like to cooperate. All right, now I'm gonna hold that 3/32 inch punch just like this, take my 1/8 inch punch, and I'm gonna push that 3/32 right through. But what I'm doing is I'm centering that 3/32 and I'm pushing that bolt stop against the side of the receiver there. I don't want things moving around. So I'm trying to make this a clean handoff, because this 1/8 inch punch is going to be pretty snug. It's a good solid tight fit. And there we go. So we successfully just stepped it up, 1/16, 3/32, and 1/8. And now we're going to take our pin and we're going to drop it right in. It'll be simple as pie. So that larger head of the pin is going to be on this side right here with the bolt stop. So now we're just going to push that 1/8 inch punch through as we're pushing that pin through. And the way we did it, you know, starting on the proper side, we ended up with the ability to just push that 1/8 inch punch all the way clean through as we're feeding in this pin, which under tension can always be the little, there you go. So that's the tricky part there, the tension. And we are pretty much there. Just kind of got to move things around a little bit. And give a little tap of the hammer. And there we go. So pretty straightforward. You know, it's a good little technique. That'll definitely save you some time. So there we go. Everything's good in place. Definitely make sure everything's fully seated. Just gonna give it one more clean tap. All right. So you can see that short leg of the bolt stop spring and how it's captured back here behind the trigger mechanism. And then that longer leg with that little bend, how it sits under the bolt stop to give it tension. So it should operate like this. All right, larger head of the pin on the bolt stop side. Trigger mechanism back in place. We got our little roll pin in place up here. Everything's held together perfect. So we're ready to rock and roll. We can go ahead and put the trigger mechanism, receiver, barrel assembly back in the stock. And you can see where we're sitting there, you know, 2 threads. So go ahead, grab our stock, throw it right over that trigger and rotate it. Make sure you get that lug in place up here. That lug will locate and kind of snap solid right into place. And now we can go ahead and put the rest of it back together. So we got our box magazine just dropped right in. You just want to get it lined up perfectly. So naturally it may want to be kind of canted, just depends. Seat it, play with it a little bit. It's not too bad. Grab your trigger guard and floor plate there. All right, go ahead and insert the follower into the magazine box there. Press down on the trigger guard, hold it in place, and now we're just going to put in those 2 screws. Grab your long screw, that's going to go in the rear. Put a couple drops of blue 242 Loctite on there. All right, you can clean up the other Loctite as well. It's not going to really hurt anything too much, but if you know you need to get those threads clean, by all means. So I'm going to drop it in the rear here behind the trigger guard. All right, same, going to put some blue 242 Loctite, little blue 242 on the threads, that short screw that's going to go up front, drop it right in. All right, holding that trigger guard and everything in place. 5/32 inch Allen key, tighten them up. You can just alternate, you know, get them hand tight and then snug them up. All right, good to go. We've got everything pretty much back together in there. We just need to throw the bolt back in and we're done. So grab the bolt, line up this extractor. You know, it spins around, line up the lugs, get the lugs in there, extractor lined up. We just slide it right in and just check and make sure it's locked in place. It doesn't come flying right back out. It's good to go, man. All right, let's do a quick little function check. Just want to make sure that bolt locks when it comes all the way back. Good. All right, place it on safe. Pull the trigger, nothing good. Place it on fire, pull the trigger. Ooh, that feels good. I like that. Yeah. All right, let's measure this trigger pull, man. All right, let's see what we get for a modified trigger pull. When we started, we were at about 5 pounds, 5 ounces, what I want to say. So between 5 1/4, 5 1/2 is where we started with the factory pull. So we'll do a 5 pull average, just like what we did to begin. All right, first pull, 3 pounds, 0.4 ounces. All right, save that. 2 pounds, 10.5 ounces. 2 pounds, 12.5 ounces. 2 pounds, 8.8 ounces. 2 pounds, 11.4 ounces. So you total it up, the average is 2 pounds, 11.1 ounces, and you can see the end there, it's number of pulls. So 5 pulls, you get a 2 pound, 11.1 ounce trigger pull. So we started at 5.5 and we're down to 2 3/4. It's pretty fantastic. I love this. Yeah, man. And you can definitely feel that difference too. It feels amazing. Well, there you have it, guys. A 50% trigger pull reduction for the newer model, Winchester Model 70s. You can't beat that. So we took it down from 5.5 to 2 3/4. Man, this feels absolutely phenomenal. That is just buttery smooth, right in that sweet spot, exactly what you would expect. I mean, if you're doing any kind of hunting or any kind of accurate shooting, long range especially, a 5.5 pound trigger pull leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, that really kind of irritates me that they say it's adjustable, because really it's not adjustable. It's just got a little set screw in there that barely does anything. You could argue that it does nothing. So really excited with what we've got here for you. Looking forward to your feedback. I am super stoked about this, impressed with it. Really appreciate you guys asking repeatedly, because we log it every time you ask for something. We've got a long running list. As long as people keep asking and we see that list filling up, it's like, hey, maybe we ought to buy one of these and see how heavy that pull is. Because the owner's manual says it can be adjusted down to 3. Maybe we should take a closer look. And we did, and I was shocked. So really thankful that you guys keep asking. That's what we appreciate, man. We really appreciate the MCARBO Brotherhood. You guys coming to us to solve problems, and we love doing that. Give us a problem, any problem. It's like a meal for us. Keeps us fed. So we're always hungry for new problems. Let me know what you guys got next. You know, we're really looking forward to doing more spring kits. Love doing them on these bolt action rifles. I mean, we're doing a lot of other stuff too, but you know, spring kits is what we've always really specialized in over the years. So love getting a nice, affordable, smooth, clean breaking trigger. Nothing better. Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you, MCARBO Brotherhood, for all your ideas and your support. As always, happy shooting.